Good evening, everyone. Welcome to everyone, including all you non-soccer fans. This is Ideas and Ideals event number 2, the Ethics of Civic Responsibility, an event brought to you in a partnership between Massey College and Shoal Synagogue. My name is Jonathan Rose. I'm a senior fellow here at the college and also a member of the synagogue. I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Massey College is built on land where many Indigenous peoples have lived. It is on the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, as well as the traditional territory of the Wendat, Seneca, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We want to acknowledge our duty of stewardship toward the land and the great privilege we have to work on this land. It's now my delight to introduce our moderator for this evening, Barbara Wade-Rose, someone who's very special to me. She is a former journalist for Maclean's, Saturday Night, the Globe and Mail, the New York Times, and many other publications. Her investigative journalism won a National Magazine Award and was a runner-up for a second. She has also received the Science and Society Journalism Award, and she has served as the president of Shoal Synagogues in downtown Toronto since 2021. Barbara.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to be the lucky person to read the biographies of Rabbi Stephanie Crawley and our guest, Bob Ray. Rabbi Stephanie Crawley is the rabbi for Shoal, Toronto's downtown Reform congregation. She graduated from Case Western Reserve University with a background in political science, international relations, and Jewish studies, and did her rabbinical studies at Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, where she was a recipient of the prestigious Tisch Fellowship. Her rabbinic work has taken her across North America and Israel, and to diverse regions from Argentina to Azerbaijan. Rabbi Crawley served as associate rabbi at Temple Micah in Washington, D.C. from 2018 to 2025, when we got her. And Bob Ray is Bob Ray, for heaven's sake. He is currently the visitor for Massey College and an astounding contributor to and shaper of Canada's public life. A small part of our reaching out for ideas and ideals was that some time ago, Bob wrote a book about prosperity and the public good called The Three Questions, referencing the ancient sage Hillel. If I am not for myself, who is for me? But if I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? I am delighted to ask Stephanie to frame the evening of discussion for us. Thank you.
Thank you. So thank you all for being here tonight. To begin, to thank is not enough to thank you, Barbara, for your incredible work and partnership on this series. And of course, thank you to Massey for welcoming us back for this second installment, which we hope will be the second of many. Just a minute about the series. Ideas and Ideals is based on a few premises. One, that a synagogue is at its best when refuge from the world, but a place to learn how to live in it more wisely, ethically, and courageously. Also, that Jewish wisdom has something to offer the world, and that it's in fact our obligation to share it. That Jews have what to offer in this current moment, this current Canadian conversation, and that our moment requires that we think bigger about what the purpose of religious communities and institutions are, and what our responsibility in shaping public discourse is. In this room, we seek to create space for the kind of honest, searching conversation that public life increasingly lacks, and to bring our best Jewish ideas into conversation with the wisest voices we can find. Tonight, that voice is Bob Ray's, And Bob, we are deeply honored by your presence this evening.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So we come into this conversation at a challenging moment, in particular to talk about tonight, a time of diminishing communal participation and greater fragmentation. In the 1960s and 70s, most people belonged to a civic organization, a church, a mosque, a synagogue, a lodge, a secular group with common interests. And we have seen since then the dissolution of that in favor of more curated, usually online communities that are exclusive rather than inclusive. But it is in community that we learn what we owe to each other. In fact, it's in community that we learn that we owe things to each other. And each of these discoveries happens through conversation. And it's that word, conversation, that I want to sit with for a moment. Because as I've done my sort of whirlwind exploration of Canada, I've come to understand something really important. Canada is a country built on conversation. Confederation is not a declaration, it's a dialogue between faiths and languages, between different people trying to sit at the same table. And it remains a conversation. Consider for a moment the very controversial notwithstanding clause. Because as an outsider, I can see the beauty in it, I'll say. It's encoded into the constitutional DNA as a structured conversation between courts and legislators, between local and national, renewable every 5 years, as if to say, this is never finished. We can keep talking. Canada, as I'm coming to learn, is built on the belief that different peoples can sit at the same table and work it out. Not through revolution, not through assimilation, but through conversation. And this is the nexus for us tonight. Because if Canada is built on conversation, then the institutions that host and teach conversations, synagogues, universities, civic organizations, are not peripheral to the Canadian project. They are constitutive of it. And right now, many of them are hollowing out. The very infrastructure of our national conversation is under strain. And who better than a people built on conversation? The Jewish people who, in fact, are a conversation, a living conversation which roots back to ancient times and comes into now, ever evolving, always connected with tradition, but never limited to it, to lead that charge. So we ask, how does a country sustain its conversational identity when the institutions that practiced it are in crisis? What happens to a country built on conversation when we seem to find civic and civil discourse particularly challenging? And where might a synagogue, itself built on that conversation, help us find a way through? So these are the questions we bring tonight. These are the questions we bring you. I can think of few people better equipped to wrestle with them. Barbara will guide and moderate our conversation this evening, and Bob and I have given her full permission to use our first names and to interrupt us whenever she sees fit, so long as she's okay if we interrupt her back. And just a note that although our distinguished guest and I can both talk about international and local politics, this evening we really want to root ourselves in the conversation around civic responsibility and conversation. So thank you again to you both. Let's begin. All right. Help us understand the time we're in. When you speak around the country, when you think about the country and internationally, what do you see?
I think it's a challenging time. I think it's a really challenging moment in our lives. A lot of assumptions that we have had for a long time are on shaky ground. I think are being challenged from many different perspectives. There's technology at work, which is changing everything we do. There's a growing gap in our society, but not just our society, every society, between rich and those who are not so rich, and there's a real growing inequality in our society, which is tremendously challenging for everyone. There's a generational gap between older people like myself who are still going, but we're taking up a lot of air in the room, as we always have, and that's causing, I think, a challenge for the generations that are following us. And at the same time, it's a particular moment for Canada because we're facing some of our own consequences of decisions that we made in the past that we have to live with, and that end up, I think, causing tremendous problems for us now as we start to deal with where we are. So those are all the reasons why I think we have to continue to worry about the gaps, and also just need to worry about each other. And it's not an abstract conversation. It's a conversation about well-being, and just a couple of things about conversation. The first one is it's a process which does not only involve talking, it also involves listening. And I think we teach a lot of courses in public speaking. I think we should need to teach courses in public listening, because a lot of times, you know, the only sort of the phases of conversation are for people are talking and waiting to talk, and then interrupting if you're still not getting the message through. And we do have to change that dynamic. And then as a country, we also have to make some decisions as communities as we go forward. And making decisions is difficult and challenging in our own lives and collectively. So those things all come together in my mind when we talk about what is the conversation about, and the importance of our civic life, of our common life together. And as a country, we've been born as a result of an invasion of North America by European explorers, people trying to catch fish, people trying to catch beavers, people trying to set up religious communities of all kinds, and the indigenous people who'd lived here for thousands of years. That's our first challenge. That's our first chapter of our history, is a difficult encounter. And then the people who came, the challenges that they had living with each other, and that's another great challenge. And then the people who are still coming, and the challenges that they face. So all these things are a story of what Peter Russell, who's a well-known Canadian political scientist and historian known to many of you, wrote about in the unfinished odyssey that we're on, that it's an odyssey that's yet to be completed, and the story is still going, which I think is a great part of the conversation.
Do those indigenous communities, when you're meeting with them, do they feel like they want to be part of the conversation, or they have to be?
I think it depends. I think that the concept that we've arrived at, which is the concept of telling the truth and then taking the journey to reconciliation, is actually a story that I think we need to understand. And for non-Aboriginal people, I think the difficult part is that they do want to be part of the conversation, but they also want to tell us things that we don't want to know or we don't want to hear. And so it's not an easy conversation. I'll just give you one example. I was doing a mediation on the lobster fishery in New Brunswick. And somebody was with me and from the law firm, and I told them, look, we're going to get into the community hall around 3 o'clock, and don't plan on leaving until well after midnight. And they said, well, why would that be? Like, is it going to take that long? I said, oh, yes, it's going to take that long. We're going to be here for a long time. And you're going to hear a lot of things that you don't really want to hear. And you're also going to hear a lot of things you say, like, do I have to know this? Like, is this part of this conversation? You say, absolutely, because they're giving you the history and the story and the background, and they want you to know who they are, and they want you to know where they're coming from. And that's a very different conversation than many non-Aboriginal people are used to having. They're not used to taking that length of time to have the conversation.
How do we help people work that muscle then? To one, sit in that sort of discomfort for that long, and even to sort of tolerate staying at the table through discomfort.
I think the way it works now is that, as in other situations around the world, the Indigenous people have leverage that they didn't have before. And that leverage actually forces prime ministers and ministers to sit and listen. And if they think they can do this without listening, they're mistaken. And I've in my work, I've tried to be pretty direct with governments about what I've learned, because I didn't come to this conclusion by, just saying I know all this. I did it because I made a huge number of mistakes. And many of you have been witness to these mistakes over me, long before you were able to get you to come here, Stephanie. But it's a lesson learned for me. It's been an object lesson in what it means to absorb the perspective and the point of view of people who come from a very different culture and a very different way of life, and want to share their views with us, but they also want to share the land. No, people think somehow the Indigenous conversation is about seizing power, and no, that they want to be part of this conversation, and I think that's a very important lesson for us all to learn.
It also seems to me, in light of the conversation that we're trying to have, is that the folks who are coming that are the best equipped to have that conversation, not only because it's their knowledge, but also Indigenous communities, obviously generalizing, have a much thicker communal cohesion. They need each other. They exist together in a way that they must have a better muscle for it than folks do if they're not practiced in it.
Traditionally, that's true, but you got to remember that Indigenous communities are deeply traumatized. The number of Indigenous people living in cities around the country is now greater, quite a lot greater, about 60% greater than the 40% who still live on reserve. So you can't say that this is a community that doesn't have its own divisions. And also within the communities there are divisions between different language groups and different cultures, and different people. So it's a universe it's complex, like all universes. We all look at the other, and we see one. And then in my case, when I married another, I realized that there's a lot of different things that I didn't know before, and she discovered the same thing. So that was the benefit, I suppose, of understanding that. And I've always said, every marriage is a mixed marriage, even though you might not think it is, but it ends up being a mixed marriage somehow.
I myself have offered that same wisdom to couples.
Me too.
So I want to sort of move us, given these divides, given even with communities that historically had much thicker relationships and social cohesion, and given all of the challenges that you named, what do you think Canada means in 2026? And I'll just offer that I recently read a book that said that, I loved this sentence, Canada is not a country you love, it's a country you worry about, this adage, and that there's been these generations and generations of trying to define what Canada is. And the fact is that it's sort of this ongoing, evolving project. So today, how would you define it?
Well, I think that we need to. There is a kind of sense in the back of many Canadians' minds of precariousness. This is I think it's, and I think this is why the Trump phenomenon is so difficult for us, because he actually is poking at a sensibility that we have. A great many people come to Canada and then leave. Many families are born here, and many people say, I'd rather live somewhere else, and most of them go to the United States if they leave Canada. So it's a country that has this sense of its fragile nature, but it's also, I think, a country that generates enormous pride. And I distinguish between pride and vanity, because, I mean, nationalism, which is based on vanity, is a pain. It's not a positive thing. It goes too far, it pushes too far, and it ends up preaching superiority, which is not healthy in societies. But you got to be proud of who you are, and if I may, it's sort of Hillel's first question, right? Saying, well, if you're not proud of who you are, then how do you expect anybody else to be proud of who you are? And if you're not prepared to advance your own cause and interest, then you can't really expect anybody else to do that. So that I think is part of it. I think there's a huge attachment to the land. I think there's incredible pride in Canada about the geography, about the parts of the country that we feel. I mean, it's really an astonishingly beautiful country, and I have been blessed with being able to travel widely across the country. It's an extraordinary country, and it's also made up of extraordinary people because of the stories that everybody brings to the conversation.
Do you have any that are the most memorable for your own understanding?
Well, there's so many, Barbara. I think that's what makes it hard to say. Is there only one? But I do think that the thing that I learned more than anything campaigning, which I've done in 11 campaigns, election campaigns, in a constituency, knocking on doors, and you learn a lot from people. You learn about their struggles, and you learn about their pride and their achievements, and you learn about their families, and if you ask questions, you learn a lot. And there's always a story behind every door, and it's a different story. And they're amazing stories of what people have done. And I find, I remember my first campaign in Broadview in 1978. The first, two stories. First door I knocked on, very nice older person, very clean porch, immaculate gray and white paint, as you go to the wooden door. And she came out and she said, yes. I said, my name's Bob Ray. She said, yes, Mr. Ray, I've heard of you. And I have a question for you. I said, what's that? And she says, what church do you go to? I figured, I'm not sure I'm really ready for this. Is this really an issue? I mean, I was a typical kind of, 30-year-old guy who wasn't deeply religious, and had some competing identity issues, and I sort of couldn't really answer her question, so she wasn't very happy with me because she liked the certainty of saying, I'm a Protestant, I'm a Catholic, and this is what I am. And that would be the list, right? It wouldn't go much wider than that. It's a very short list. And the other one was nearby, was meeting a Japanese Canadian senior citizen as well, who wanted to express his deep appreciation to my political party at that time, which was supporting the cause of Japanese Canadians in the Second World War. And he'd been deeply affected by it because he himself had come from British Columbia and gone into a camp and then come away from the camp and come in. And you're saying, and this is all like in half an hour? I'm kind of absorbing all this. And I mean, you're a rabbi. You know how, you know stuff, but you also know about people, right? I mean, people want your help. They want your advice. They want your counsel. You see people in moments of great stress and difficulty as well as great joy. And it's extraordinary what you're able to learn about people and their stories.
It's a beautiful way into the next question I have for you, which is, you know, if I think about the trajectory of my life, although there's a part of the way I tell the story in which I always knew I wanted to be a rabbi for many of the things that you just articulated, there was also an equally strong part of me for a long time that thought that I'd go into politics. It's not off the table, but I have a pretty good job right now. And for a lot of reasons, I went towards rabbi, and largely it was because there were things that I felt like I could do through authenticity, through living in a messier sort of existence that being a rabbi allowed me to do that I felt like politics wouldn't. And I'd be curious, you've written pretty extensively on this, like what politics can't do. What do religious organizations or clubs or other things, what can we do that politics can't do? Where are the limits or the contours?
Well, I mean, I just mentioned one, which is that I think we turn to religion and to religious perspectives when we finally come to grips with the fact that life is short and that there's a lot that happened before we got here and there's a lot that's going to happen after we get here. And the window that we have is not unlimited, and that the perspectives that we need to have about that life are messages that speak to the deeper questions about the meaning and about the value of human life. And that is something that I can think about and feel, but it's not my professional vocation, and I would be very wary of pronouncing on these things, except that from time to time I do try to reflect a little bit more about that perspective as I get older, because death is no longer a million miles away, and you realize that there's the time you have is limited, even though we all think basically we're at least 20 years younger than we really are, and we all assume that somehow miraculously we're going to be living forever. It's a very common belief. The good thing about that is it allows us to keep, to really just keep on going. But I think that's one very basic thing, and I think the only thing you said that kind of I felt, well, does that mean I'm inauthentic because I'm in politics? I chose to become a politician. Does that mean I lack authenticity?
I mean, we're just getting to know each other, so I'm not sure.
I mean, there's one person in the room who might say, yeah, sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I think it's actually possible to live an honest political life. And I think that the way in which we despise politics is wrong, because, as I've written as well, politics is necessary, and it's an important part of life in society. But there are some questions that politics can't answer. And I mean, for example, I think one of the reasons why Parliament ties itself into complete knots in dealing with MAID is because, like, what do we know? Like, do we know the answer to these questions? That's not, taxes, yeah, I can talk about that, but life and death, I'm not sure I'm really equipped to do that. And so that's where you come in. And that's I think, the the enormous value that religion can perform and does perform, as well as I certainly have views about, some people who use religion in a weaponized way that I think is an extremely negative thing, and that's doesn't mean I admire people of faith, and I enjoy working with them and talking with them and engaging with them. But I do the job that I have done and have retired from is still a vocation that I believe in.
I'm letting that word vocation sit with me, and I would love to hear the politicians that I grew up with use that same language. And I wonder, might be rhetorical, whether that comes at the start of a career or at the end of a career, sort of reflectively.
I think it's always been an aspect of my approach to politics. I mean, partly as a kid, I was always interested in politics. I went to school in Washington when President Kennedy was elected, and like I was 12 years old, and was always fascinated by the political process, and so. But the more you say, well, do I want to be the person in that room at that time? Many people are motivated by a variety of things, but I think in my career, in my life, I looked at politics as two things. One was, it was a very, very good way to actually help people as individuals. Like you can actually, and when I would have I have a clinic every Saturday morning for most of my political life, and people would come into the office and meet me and talk about things they were concerned about, what they wanted me to do, or they had a problem with whatever it was. And I needed that to ground me, because I felt that politics is not just about giving speeches, it's not just about being involved in national issues or even international issues. It's actually about looking somebody in the eye, saying, what can I do? And also looking them in the eye and say, sorry, I don't think this is going to work. Let's try some other avenue. This is what we need to be thinking about. But it's that daily conversation, if you like, that daily engagement with people that I realized as I was struggling as to what I should do with my life, that was part of what I needed. Yeah. And that. And as you start doing it more, you get better at it, and you figure, well, don't go to that office, go to this office, and that's the person. You get to know people, you build a network, and you've got a whole number of skills you can bring to the table. At the same time as talk to people about broader issues, which has also been great. It's been fun.
I'd like to ask about, if we're talking about institutions, moving from the national institutions we have to the international, i.e. the UN. What experience that was like for you?
Well, it's funny because I talk about in Washington, but after we lived in Washington, we lived in Geneva, where my dad was the ambassador to the UN in Geneva. And so for 10 years, my dad was either ambassador to the UN in Geneva or in New York. So the UN was kind of like a big part of my growing up. And I can honestly say that my father never idealized or idolized the UN. I mean, he was not one of those people who felt the UN can do no wrong. He was under no illusions about that at all. But the premise of the United Nations, that you need a place where people come from all over to talk, is a premise that he fully supported. I mean, he believed intensely in that. And I think that's sort of a view that I've inherited, and I saw it in action. I mean, there's aspects of the UN which drive you crazy. You can go on for hours listening to people who never really say anything, and you just say, this is impossible. And there are horrible things that are said and done, and you say, okay, and then people say, how can you work in such an institution? And you say, well, because it reflects the total imperfections and even worse of humankind, and yet you need a place where everybody's there. And it also performs, I think, in some parts of the world, a really positive role in the life of people. And I think we're at risk of losing that, which is not a good thing.
I want to move us a little bit, a conversation. Almost always, when someone finds out I'm a rabbi, the first thing they say is a confession. I'm a bad Jew. And of course I tell them, no. I mean, those are for the Jews. The non-Jews do not tell me that they're bad Jews. And And so I'm asking the next question I want to ask you in thinking about that, because of course I tell them, you're not a bad Jew. If you're here, if you're engaged, if you're an ethical person, you're, then you're not. I had a friend who wrote a book actually on this, and almost always, if asked that question, the first person says, they always say themselves, and then they say some sort of political figure, usually Stephen Miller. She interviewed 150 people for this. But I want to know what you think makes a good Canadian. Like, if we were sort of crafting that as a good citizen, every child who went through our schools came out as X. What is it? Who is it?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's any different than what we would think a good human being should be, and that would be, you want them to be curious. We want people who are more than tolerant. Toleration is, doesn't go far enough in what it means to celebrate diversity and celebrate difference and dignity of each person. I think a good Canadian is happy to travel, happy to visit and see and learn, and be open to the world. That's why so many Americans have Canadian flags on their backpacks. We are a people that move around, and we do have I think Canadians at their best are really good listeners. I think Canadians at their best are really good mediators, problem solvers. But there's no one type, I mean, there's many different ways of being a good Canadian, and unlike some other national faiths or identities, we don't see ours as exclusive. Like, we don't see I'm a good Canadian, and that's better than being a good Pole or a good anything. You say, well, that's part of your identity as in the world is to be a citizen of a country, but it's not your only identity. And I think the absence of that kind of strong, overweening kind of nationalism is a wonderful quality in people. I mean, I used to yearn for those kinds of people at the UN. Like, is this somebody who's not just going to be boasting about their country, or is this somebody who's going to be interested in other places? And yeah.
It's really interesting that the qualities that you list, because I can think of many nationalities where that would be where if they said, well, it's any quality that makes you a good human being, and then they would list very different qualities. They wouldn't say a good listener necessarily. They wouldn't say curious. They wouldn't say traveling. They would say other things. And so there is a particularism here that I think is it's actually worthy of lifting up.
I do, and I think the other thing about Canadians is we're a very, very funny people. This is true, and the reason that it's true is because our national form of humor is self-deprecation. And self-deprecation is the most sincere form, is the thing about ability to talk about yourself in a way that slows at your kind of, you see things differently. That's a very, very Canadian perspective. And there are many other countries for whom, the national humor is sarcasm or making fun of other people. And that's not the way we kind of identify our best humorists. I mean, every country has humorists, every country has jokes, which is a whole other part of my personality that I try to control. But I mean, it is a pretty basic part about being a Canadian.
A friend
as well as saying sorry. Sorry,
yes.
Sorry, I'm Canadian.
A friend of mine recently wrote comparing the role of prophet in society to the role of comedian in society. The ability to look out from the outside and offer a critique, whether it's through humor or through a prophetic wish of death and gloom, as our prophets often do, but also a hope. And I think there's the humor and also the sort of Canadian window into the world actually sort of shares that similarity. And that's where the humor comes from, because it's self-deprecating also in response to something else, in relationship to something else.
Well, I'll look for the humor in the Torah. I think it's sometimes hard to find because I never associate, Isaiah with, a barrel of laughs kind of thing. Maybe I've missed something.
Jonah's our funniest prophet, yeah. So how or where do we craft citizens that are funny, that are curious, that want to travel, that are good listeners, that care, that feel a responsibility both for themselves as Canadians and in the world? Where can that happen, given the backdrop of everything we've talked about?
Well, I think one of the places it happens is in places of worship. And, what are the values? What are the fundamentals of community life that people grow up in who are being raised in a particular faith? Are they being raised in a faith which says, we're better than everybody else? Or are they being raised in a faith that says there's goodness and wisdom in all faiths, and it's important for us to understand our particular role in the universe of faith, but it's also important for us to understand that other people have, I was in a chat group the other day with some old guys. We have an old guys meeting, and
I'm usually not invited to
no,
those.
I'm sorry. You're not old, and you're not a guy, so you can't come. But you can make a guest. You can make a guest. Okay. I think you might know something about this group. Anyway, it was a fascinating conversation because we started out by talking about growing up. What did we think of other religions? It's a very Canadian conversation in the sense of people. We have Jews and Catholics and Protestants in the group, and no Muslims yet, but they'll come. And the conversation was very, very funny because we were talking about, well, what did you think about Catholics when you were a kid? And people were saying things about really horrible things that they kind of just picked up as part of the family and the religious school kind of lore. And same thing, I won't say who, but a leading Catholic politician in the province said, I was told when I was growing up, do not go into a Protestant church. Do not go into those churches. You are not welcome, and you don't want to be there. And you sort of say, this is incredible, but it's the way we were brought up, or for a lot of the arguments have been about religion, and at the same time, everybody comes out of it because somehow, when they get to university or they get into a high school that's not religiously based, or they have a broader understanding, then all of a sudden it all kind of breaks down. But I do think that one of the challenges we face as a country is that we're allowing too many of these things to be perpetuated for longer periods of time. And I think this is a particular challenge we're facing now because of the makeup of the country and the fact that we're not spending enough time thinking about this. And we need to really get at the importance of people sharing, embracing a common identity as well as the other identities that they have. So that you have an identity as a Canadian. It's not exclusive, but it is part of your identity. We have a religious and racial identification, which is fine, absolutely okay. But if it's one that says we are not only different, we're better, and is exclusive of other people, then there's a real problem. And needless to say, but I do want to say it, because it needs to be said, if anything is based on hatred of anybody else because of their religious background, that is terrible. And that still exists in Canada, as we know, and we have to deal with it. And we have to continue to figure out ways in which we can deal with it. It's partly dealing with kids when they're young, but a lot of it has to do with social media and dealing with the impact of social media in creating silos of belief and silos of perspective, which is, I think, one of the real problems that we face with social media today.
And it's hard not to see how and why religious institutions have dwindling affiliation. Why would you want to join something that taught you to hate instead of love? And so it's the question of like, what is our job right now in reforming and shifting the emphasis of our religious institutions to still be deeply rooted in the identities that they give folks, but also to say, we are a place for moral reasoning. We are the place where we learn how to be with people that we would not necessarily invite over to dinner, but we're in community with, and we feel bound up with them. And so it becomes a sort of perpetuating problem, because the things that were part of religion need to no longer be part of religion, but now people don't come, so they don't hear those things. They don't understand sentences like my mentor, Larry Hoffman, who says, like, Judaism is a conversation. Religion is a conversation that's a practice in speaking in a register that does justice to the human condition. And I would guarantee that lots of us have existed in religious spaces where they don't feel like what's being spoken is doing justice to the human condition. And I guess my concern, and the thing that sort of keeps me up at night, is that if we're not doing it, who else is doing it? And where is that moral reasoning being or not being shaped?
I just want to say, too, that religious institutions can encompass people of no faith or of questioning faith. We pretty much have, at City Shul, we pretty much have an atheist annex, and who deeply want to be there. And they add to the conversation.
Oh, for sure. And I would say if the job is actually to learn and to practice how to speak in a register that does justice to the human condition, that should be something that's inclusive of anybody who wants to walk into that space, right? To learn how to cut above noise, to speak in a sort of prophetic way, to learn how to really be like a human in the best way and not in the worst way.
I almost feel I'm unqualified to give you, if a rabbi's never said to me, how do we fix this problem with people not coming to synagogue? I would say, I don't know.
Help me.
I don't know.
We don't have that problem at City Shul, but.
No, I mean, I have a problem with people not coming to political meetings or people feeling disaffected. But I think there is a broader issue of disaffection that makes it harder for people to be social. And there's lots of studies that have been done about this in North America. There's a general decline in rates of participation in anything. And there's lots of explanations for it, which are not entirely satisfactory. But I think the strength of what I'm hearing from you is let's not be afraid to have that conversation in our place of worship, because it's kind of fundamental to why people want to come. I do think that people will come because you're speaking to something that actually appeals to a lot of people who might say, a lot of the other stuff doesn't appeal to me particularly, but this does as a focus for what we're trying to do. It makes a lot of sense. And so you will get people coming voluntarily to say, how can I engage with the synagogue in ways that are going to help me grow as a person while remaining a doubter. And there are many, I'm looking at Paul, there are many Christian churches that have the same challenge of where they have, as a part of a broad process of reform over several hundred years, have become quite open to a dialogue that says, look, we really just want to talk about how to live a good life and how to make a positive contribution. And if somebody said, well, that's not enough to be a member of a congregation, you say, well, actually it is. And then we move on from that to saying, what else are we? Yeah.
I want to ask you a fun question. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? If you wrote a fourth question, in the vein of this being Judaism, Canada, ongoing conversation, you get to add your sentence or question to it. What do you think it would be?
We should have given you this before the evening.
Yeah, I've got my answer ready to go, which is really unfair. So,
Well, no, why don't you give your
Okay.
answer, and then, I mean, I'm
You
known, I'm known for ad-libbing, but I want to be,
Sure.
a little reflective.
So for me, if I'm only for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? If not now, when? If not who? If not me, then who? If not me, then who? Which is really sort of for me, like a way of being in the world of saying, I believe that more people need to raise their hands. I believe more people need to feel empowered to make change. I feel that that the question asked should be a kind of daily question that you ask instead of someone else will do it. Maybe I'll do it.
Yeah, I would say which is a little bit of a sort of a riff on if not now when, but I would say if not today, then why will tomorrow be any different or better? The excuses that we have for delay in making decisions about our own lives, about the lives of our communities. I mean, people will often say to me, "Oh, this is not a good time to have that discussion." And you sort of say, "Well, tell me exactly when is the good time to have that discussion?" There's never a good time to have some discussions, but you need to have them. But I think your question is better.
You can work on it. Let me
Yeah,
know.
I'm working on it. Yeah.
Stephanie, you talked about it is in community that we learn what we owe each other. And I'd like both of you to expand on that if you're willing.
Well, it's interesting because that's a phrase that I used in speeches in the 1980s, and a couple of my staff said to me, "Are you going all religious on us?" And I said, "Maybe. I mean, who cares?" And I would talk about the love that we owe each other, not just what is it? How do we reinforce the solidarity? And another story about the three questions, which relates to that, is, and I told you this in our chat. We had a prep talk before this. Rabbi Marmer, Dov Marmer, who's a wonderful friend of our families and was with us through many difficult moments and good moments. When he read the book, he called me up and he said, "It's okay." I said, "So if you know Dov, you'll know what." He said, "But you got the questions in the wrong order." I said, "No, I don't think I did, Dov. That's Hillel's." No, he got the questions in the wrong order. And because the second question is the most important question. And that's the question of solidarity. And I actually said, well, I actually think freedom is pretty foundational. Before we get to solidarity, we got to recognize the value of freedom, or everything becomes a little totalitarian. And so we had a good, healthy debate about it. He said, anyway, he says, the book is not socialist enough, it's not Jewish enough. And I said, well, hey, you know what, Dov? I'm not socialist enough, and I'm not Jewish enough. And this is why I'm sticking to the book. And it was a really good discussion, though, because his view was, and it would be today, I think, is that the solidarity that comes from understanding community and the need to work and to be able to understand that what makes you human is not just your individualism, but what makes you really human is your ability. You're part of a group. You're part of something bigger than yourself. And that's the foundations to the rule of law. That's the foundations to everything, is accepting the fact that there's something above you, which effectively is a standard to which you have to hold yourself. And that the trouble with the first question is it's too in your face. It's too kind of, well, if you're not going to be for yourself, who's going to be for you? So go out and be for yourself. Well, we know lots of people in politics, in life, who say, hey, I like Hillel's first question. You say, what about the second one? Not so much.
Yeah.
But the reality is we don't get to choose between the three questions. We have to accept their they work together, and each one needs the other. But you could use a fourth one too.
We can always add, and so for me, I think I actually had two things. It's like it's in communities that we learn that we owe things to each other, which I think is the very first step, is that it's very easy for us to walk through the world, and in fact, our brains and bodies are kind of engineered to do this, to focus on our own survival, to take care of ourselves. And it is only by existing in community with other people that you then realize, oh, actually, I'm bound up with someone else. And in Judaism, in a Jewish space, or in other religious spaces, I think it's a practice in saying, first of all, someone else relies on me. And I think, like, my examples are all Jewish, but I think it's like the idea of showing up to a minyan, of enabling someone else to pray. It's the idea of showing up for a community celebration, like bar bat mitzvah. It's the idea of bringing people food, but it's also the idea of sitting and listening and holding space and making it known that that you have your own individual prayers, but in fact we all pray communally. And in fact, there's a story in the Talmud where a merchant wants to find out how he should formulate his prayers when he's on a journey. And it says, well, isn't it weird for me to be on a journey and still using the collective Hebrew to be speaking in we? And the Talmud's answer is no. Wherever you are in the world, you always link yourself back to the we, because you're connected to them, you're responsible for them, and they're sort of leaning on you being able to do it. And it's once we discover that we then learn how to belong to each other, how to show up for each other in a real way, how to live as though each of us, as each and every person, has human dignity. I talk about this a lot, but it is about being able to look at somebody. If we practice it on each other, we are a lot more likely to be able to treat the other, and then the other's other, as though they themselves are endowed with love and respect and human dignity. And then the last piece, because I think there's a third, is we do that. There's a change that happens within us, then there's a change which happens in our community, and when that change happens in our community, that's when bridges get formed. It's what sociologist Robert Putnam calls bridging capital. And the bridging capital is actually what allows us to have really hard conversations. And because we have lost many places to do all three of those ordered questions, the bridges are especially fragile.
I would like to mention that your subtitle for your book was Prosperity in the Public Good. And Massey, in its most recent stewardship, has focused on the public good. And I'm interested in hearing what you think the public good is.
Well, one of the purposes of the book was to build on sort of lessons that I'd learned in government, which was that we were going through a rough time. You may recall a rough time as a province. Free trade had just been introduced. Interest rates were sky high. We lost a lot of jobs very quickly. The province was in a pretty severe recession for about 1.5 to 2 years, and I grew very, very aware of the need to find a way to engage people about two things: prosperity and the public good. Because if you say, I'm only interested in prosperity, we don't have prosperity, we don't have anything, we got to focus all our attention on prosperity. And then I would say, well, what about the solidarity and the public good that is the reason for our wanting to be prosperous? Surely the only reason to want to be prosperous is not simply to make money for ourselves, but it's to figure out what is the common purpose that we're addressing. And I think you can say that in our societies we've become very skewed towards the prosperity argument and insufficiently aware of the public good argument. In fact, there's a large argument that says that the public space is being restricted and the private space is expanding, and that is is a real challenge for our quality of life, for our lack of solidarity, for all the problems that we can look around in terms of homelessness and the other issues that we see, to say, you know, things are fraying. The public good is not anywhere near as strong as it should be. Now, and by the way, there's also public good that speaks to the longer term issues around climate change and future generations. And that's why I mentioned the religious perspective is the one that allows us to say, well, there were a lot of people here before we got here, and there's a lot of people going to be here after we're here. So what are we doing during our time here to honor those who came before us, but also to try not to at least diminish the quality of life for the people who are coming after? And as opposed to sort of the disposable society point of view that's become very, very, you know, widespread. And so that's what the public good is. The public good goes beyond the interests of our own time. We need to do good in our own time, but we can't just have the perspective that says we're not interested in what happens after we're gone, because you're building something that is supposed to be much more deep-seated and not timeless, but you know, I was going to say permanent, but that's not the right word, because
Eternal.
permanent, yeah, eternal is fine. Yeah, eternal.
It's a good Jewish word.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure it's only Jewish, but anyway, that's just sort of
Probably not only, but
Yeah.
it's definitely one we use.
eternal damnation. That's something I think we
We don't do
we all
that.
grew up with a lot of that.
We are going to move very shortly to Q&A, which I'm sure many of you have questions for Bob Ray. I just want to check, Stephanie, any last questions you'd like to ask?
Well, first I'll say you can also ask me questions if you want, although you can ask me questions anytime, so it's up to you. I've decided as a rule that as we continue this series, I want the last question for as long as it feels appropriate to be what gives you hope.
For me, hope is not. Hope is something that I need personally in order to do what I do. That it is the space, it is the sense of light, it is the air that is absolutely essential if I'm going to be able to contribute to building anything. And so in that sense, hope is not it's not like it's an option. You can either have hope or no hope. Well, if you have no hope, you got nothing. And you got nothing to offer, and it's sort of like, I don't really want to live in a building that's been designed and built by an architect who has no hope, you know? I don't want to cross a bridge by somebody who says, I don't really believe in bridges. I don't, you know. Let's cut a few corners here. I don't really. No, that's not what I want. That's not what needed for me. And I think particularly with in offering encouragement to people, and particularly to younger people, which I now do quite a lot of in this place and other places. It really is important to say, look, you're going on a journey, and the first part of the journey is going to be more difficult than it might have been for your parents or your grandparents, but it's going to get better, and you're going to have to figure out how to make it better, and we're all going to collectively have to figure out how to change it in a way that's not going to be as difficult for you. And hope, like trust, is a two-way street. You hope, I hope, and we work with trust. And that's the meaning of faith. In a sense, they all go together, because you're really believing in the potential goodness of other people, and you're believing in what things you can achieve in common. And so that's why hope is important to me.
Stephanie and Bob, thank you so much for this wisdom. So we have time for some questions. The incomparable Jonathan Rose will be leading the Q&A. Put your hands up if you want to ask something.
I want to ask you, I want to go back to this idea of Canada as a conversation, because I'm very concerned about a part of Canada that's deciding perhaps to opt out of this conversation, and that's Alberta. My wife and I are both from Alberta, and we're going there in July, and after what you've said, I'm thinking, okay, I'll listen to them, but I'm gonna have a very deep groove in my tongue while doing so. What is your take on what's really going on there? Because all I'm reacting to are people I hear that seem to be speaking from a position of hate and contempt for our country and not really wanting to redefine a conversation.
I think one of the ways, I've actually talked about this with a couple of people, about, how do we deal with the difficulties of the conversation? And in a way, with Quebec, it's different because partly the language difference, so, you want to really be able to talk to people in French about it. But in Alberta, it's kind of right up close. Here we are. And I think the first thing is to try to ask questions about what is it about the country that makes you feel this way? Where are you getting some of these ideas from? Where are you getting some of this information from? And really trying to explore without being contemptuous about, they don't know what they're talking about or whatever. You kind of have to push back because that's what a dialogue is about. A conversation is not about listening and then not responding. It is about responding. But I think, and it's responding without necessarily challenging, their right to, well, I have a right to my opinion. I say, yeah, you have a right to your opinion. And I have a right to tell you that your opinion is based on false information. And one of the challenges we're facing in the Alberta debate is that it is a debate that is taking place just like Brexit did. And Brexit was the earlier days. It's taking place at a time when there is so much lying going on that's quite deliberate and quite intentional, that is intended to undermine and destroy the country. And it doesn't come from Canada. It comes from the United States. And that's where a lot of the money is coming from. So we really need to understand this is a very challenging attack on our democracy and on our vibrancy. Now, my own view is the vote, which is a vote about a vote, it's not a vote about separation. It's about a vote of do we have a vote on separation, which I think ultimately people are going to say, what do we, really? And, you look at continue to engage with people, but you're also going to find that in Alberta, from my experience, there's a huge range of opinion. The idea that there's this Alberta view is something that people say. I mean, President Trump says the same thing. Everyone knows that, this, and he'll say something that's emphatically not true, right? Just not true. And so you then have to deal with it in a way that is kind of gets you into trying to see where's the light, where is the little crack in the argument that you can say, really, you think that? Well, do you have any family in the rest of Canada? Do you have any other connections? There are many people in Alberta, weren't born in Alberta. And in fact, the ironic thing is that who will win the vote in a referendum is probably the people who live in Edmonton, Calgary, and Red Deer, many of whom are immigrants, and they don't want to have anything to do with breaking up the country. That's not why they came to Canada. But even those people are very proud to be Albertan. And I think we have to allow people to say, I'm an Albertan. I mean, in Ontario, we don't run around saying, I'm an Ontarian. It's sort of like saying, I'm a Rotarian. Are you a Rotarian, Ontarian? But I think it's about really saying that you respect that. There is a Western identity that's important, and we have to understand some of the qualities of that. And I think the more we engage in that discussion that way, and also, frankly, spend a lot of time talking to Albertans who agree with you and ask them the question, how can we help this argument become more constructive? Because right now it's just it's a schoolyard kind of argument. I'm this and you're that, and you sort of say, well, no, let's try to get at the factual basis of it. But it's a key conversation. It really is. And I'm glad you're spending the summer there. Yeah, that's good.
Early on, Bob, you said that you had tried all your life to be an honest politician. And I think that's true. I worked in the Waste Reduction Office, which you created when you were the premier of this province, one of the more enlightened environmental decisions that happened under your watch. My fear is that we are seeing very many politicians who are not honest, or who don't appear to be honest, and whose lives don't appear to hold the kind of honesty and integrity that yours has. How do we deal with that?
Well, I mean, I'm having trouble with it too, because, I mean, one of the things that, now that I'm sort of relatively free to say stuff, although, I mean, your freedom to say stuff is never unlimited, because you have to say, well, who am I going to offend by saying this? And you have to weigh that. But it is important for us to deal with not just the honesty in terms of what people say, but the honesty in terms of what people do. And there is a real issue of corruption and self-enrichment that can go on in politics, and that, as it can in business and as it can in life of all kinds. And I think we have to be much more aware of, just as we have to be more aware of where propaganda is coming from and how it suddenly arrives at our door or on our Facebook page, we need to understand where the hell that come from and then begin to really look at it. And I think we have to do the same thing with the lying. We need to understand the sophistication with which people are lying and behaving badly. Some forms of behaving badly are just routine people being stupid, but other things are much more dangerous than that, which is where we get, you know, beyond the morality of telling the truth, but you get into the immorality of stealing, which seems to me something we should all be quite worried about.
Thank you, Bob, and for the lady. We were talking, the issue here is civic responsibility. Civic responsibility is informed by culture, civic responsibility. If Canada, if our culture is one that is, as Justin Trudeau said, we are the first post-national cultural civilization because we have no culture. If we don't have a culture, how then can we know what is our civic responsibility?
Justin Trudeau ever said that, but if he did, it was not a correct statement. Of course we have a culture. We have a very vital culture. It's not a culture that is that easy to define because it does represent such a level of diversity of expression. It's not based on language alone. It's not based on ethnicity alone. And so often we say, well, French culture. Well, I defy you today to go on the subway, you know, the metro in Paris, and sit down and look around and say, French culture, very interesting, but like not exactly what what we were taught it was going to be. And there's a famous essay by a French sociologist 150 years ago, a guy called Ernest Renan, and he wrote a little essay called "What is a Nation?" And he was writing at the moment when European nationalism was coming to the fore, when French nationalism, German nationalism, and the nationalists in all these countries, European countries, were defining it in terms of race and ethnicity and religion, and you know, the connection to the particular form of art or architecture or whatever. This is our culture. This is who we are. And he would say, well, you know, that's not true, because in fact, in France, people speak many different languages, and in fact, there are Protestants in France as well as Catholics, and you can't say it's only race, because the makeup of the people in the southern part of the country is actually very different ethnically than the people living in the northern part of the country. So, and he went through every country. He'd say, you know, what is it? It's not these things. What is it that makes a nation? A nation, this definition he came up with was to say, nation is a group of people who have a common sense of having done good things together in the past, and they have a common sense of what they'd like to keep on doing and do it in the future. And so it's a civic identity. It's not an ethnic identity. It's not a racial identity. And so anybody who says there's no such thing as a Canadian culture, yes, there is. We are a nation that has been able to survive in this part of the world for a very long period of time, despite all our differences and despite the pain of some of that history. At different moments, we have come together to celebrate who we are as Canadian. And anybody who thinks that Canada isn't a real thing and doesn't really exist, I think misses the sense that people have that they are part of something that is bigger than themselves, that is also collectively stronger and better than they are by themselves, and is something that they want to be part of and don't want to lose. So in that sense, I guess I'm a kind of a patriot, but I'm not a nationalist in any other sense. But I do think we have a culture.
I mean, if anything, just to sort of thread the needle or tie the knot or whatever we're doing, is to say is that
Tying the knot means something else. We're not doing that.
no, we're not. Tomorrow? Is really that I think nationalism in this way, or hyper-nationalism, or all of the authoritarianism and fascism, the roads that we go down, are actually when you forget that your job is to do good. And that your job is to remember the good that you have done and to continue doing that good. And it's when you only become focused on your own perpetuation. The ability to exist outweighs the ability to do good, or the desire to do good, and the desire to continue to exist. And sort of to say, it was like, we should always be willing to do good, to the point that almost we would ask the question of like, what could go wrong if we did this good, in a way. At least that's sort of on a communal level, that's what I think about like what it means for us to be trying to continue to do good, is not to worry about our existence, but to worry that we need to exist, to continue to need to exist.
We have time for about 4 minutes worth of questions.
Hi.
Hi, Michael.
My name is Michael Valpy, and I'm a senior fellow here, as well as a journalist for a long time. And before I ask my question of both of you, Rabbi, could you tell me who said Canada is not a country you love, it's a country you worry about? Because I think you'd find a lot of young people here, as well as my young people, who would agree with you wholeheartedly.
It was in a book by a biographer, Charlotte Gray, that the City Shul leadership team gifted me as a Get to Know Canada gift, and it's in her introduction. I don't know who the quote is exactly.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. My question for both of you is, what has been the bruising that has been done to Canada by the withdrawal from public life of religion? And how much are we being hurt by this?
I don't know. I mean, it's like a lot of questions. Michael Valpy has been asking me questions in public places for maybe 50 years. And that's a really good one. I mean, I don't know whether it's religion that has retreated from our public life, or whether it is Canadians who have withdrawn from organized religion, which is happening, which is, it's not as definitive. But in Quebec, for example, the change in the attitude towards organized religion in the last 50 years has been just huge. In English Canada, not quite as dramatic, because our attachment to the religions was not quite as systematic and dramatic as it was in Quebec. But you see the same thing in Ireland. You see it in many countries where there's been just for whatever reason, sometimes relating to the behavior of organized religion, and other times just because of social change. So I don't think it's that organized religion has decided to pull away from public engagement. I think it's that they have to accept the fact that organized religions have to accept the fact that they are only part of a broader conversation in which their message may have trouble kind of reverberating. And that's, I think, a challenge that is being felt. But I also think that I have detected in this conversation that I've had tonight, and in a conversation that I had with the president of St. Michael's College 2 days ago, my sense is there's a hunger for people to have religious people returning to the conversation because they feel there's something missing in a discussion that doesn't allow that voice legitimacy. And I think that's also true of the public response to Pope Leo, which I think has been phenomenal as an event, and the extent to which people really want to listen to what he's saying, because it's the first time they've heard those kinds of arguments being made in an American accent that is also reflective of a view of somebody who doesn't just think about the United States as, you know, the best there ever was. I mean, he has a because of his experience as a priest in Latin America for most of his life, he comes at things from a very different perspective. So, I mean, that's all I think I would say. But I do think it's a mistake for anyone, I would argue, to believe that because of their particular faith, religious groups really shouldn't contribute to the debate around, you know, fundamental questions of public policy in the country.
And I'll just offer very quickly, I could probably give you 20 different answers that I think, but one, I think I think that one thing that religion does particularly well is putting us proximate to the ancient. And the further we get away from being in conversation with things that are ancient, the more likely we are to have a crisis of elderhood, which I think we also have. We not only fear getting old, but we don't in the same way venerate and respect and listen to elders. There's a sense of new is better. And I think that religion helps us. I think religious spaces, both in their own makeups, but also in the relationship with the text, help with the sense of elderhood, as well as this sort of like, if you feel like you're part of a larger thing, or whether that's in this world or the world to come, that you're more likely to feel invested in it. And then there's a whole other conversation which we might have about what it means to continue to force yourself to be in community with people you disagree with. At their best, I think religious institutions are practices in sitting with people who you don't necessarily like, but that you love, that you have a shared conversation with.
No. Bruised? No, I wouldn't use that phrase.
We have time for one last question, and it is going to go to Arlene.
It's
Purley.
not a question, it's a clarification. We're in Massey College, and a while ago, I went here, and Robertson Davies was my thesis advisor, and it was Robertson Davies who said, some countries you love, some countries you hate. Canada is a country you worry about. So I just thought...
Thank you.
There's the answer. So listen to your elders, right?
Yeah.
Although she's younger than I am. That's good.
So thank you for your wisdom, Rabbi Crawley. Thank you for your wisdom, Bob Ray. Please help yourself to some libations, and hopefully you'll stay around and you can chat.
Thanks
very
everybody.
much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.